Welcome back to Vantage. I've got something focused on the energy transition theme for you today. We've got a manager who's going to talk us through some of the challenges he's faced and what he's done to resolve them. Let's go take a look. Welcome back to Vantage. As we head into the colder months, I thought it'd be worth taking a look at the energy transition team. James, welcome to Vantage. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, the role you play, and the fund that you're working on?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for having me on. So I'm James Bustin. I'm Assistant Fund Manager for Gresham Energy Storage Fund PLC, often referred to by its ticker as GRID. I work at Gresham House, which manages the fund. My role kind of covers a bit of everything to do with the fund, so that's the funding requirements of that, be that equity or debt, investment objectives, what we're looking to build out, as well as overseeing the commercial aspects of the portfolio and ensuring we optimise every aspect of the fund.
Okay. So go over at a high level the investment approach of the energy storage fund. What are you trying to achieve?
Yeah, so we're focused predominantly on battery energy storage at the moment. The fund, in theory, is open to all energy storage, but battery energy storage is the kind of primary focus, mostly because it ticks all the right boxes in terms of the cost, the efficiency, and the ability to kind of turn a profit from that as well. So we're looking to invest into grid-scale battery energy storage systems. They range in size. Our smallest is about 5 megawatts. Our newest is going to be 87 megawatts and 2 hours duration. So there's a range. We're predominantly looking at the larger scale these days.
Yeah.
The investment approach is to target a 8% unlevered NAV total return and a 15% levered total return. That has been slightly changed. It's been a bit more of a challenge over recent times, but we've consistently been hitting that recently.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, and just for a layman like me, just you invest in one of these assets, a battery energy storage. They exist because there is not consistent sort of energy generation, etc., from the renewable sources. So they step in effectively and supply into the grid, and you basically enter into supply agreements effectively at different prices depending on what's going on in the world. Is that a sort of good summary of what you do?
Broadly, yes. So we're often referred to as flexible technology. The idea is we can flex the demand and supply side of the equation. The way the energy system works in the UK, but internationally as well, is the supply and demand have to balance in real time at all times.
Yeah.
So flexible technology is needed to increase supply or increase demand as and when required in order to keep that balance steady. That can come through various different sources. So frequency response is often referred to as an ancillary service. That's providing the batteries to the system to balance the frequency. So the frequency can deviate from 50 hertz if the supply or demand is out of sync.
Yeah.
So the batteries help with that on a smaller scale. Trading, which we'll probably come on to as well, is on a larger scale, so that's more volume based, and that is where you've got a significant volume excess. For example, renewables during the day, we would charge up the batteries during the day. In the evening, when you don't have the renewable generation, we will then export again into the system to help cover the supply shortfall.
Okay. And I mean, given that energy transition is this theme that's been running for a while, you would have imagined that actually there's quite a sort of tailwinds effectively in terms of the sector. But it's been a pretty challenging sector over the last year or so. Explain what's been going on.
Yes, it has been a bit of a challenge the past year to 18 months. It's probably helpful to go a little bit further back to explain the trajectory before we get on to where we are today. So if we look back to IPO when we started out, we were predominantly focused on the ancillary services I talked about earlier, so frequency response. Those have gone through various different forms, but in essence through to 2022 we're doing frequency response. So that was providing the batteries to stabilise the system on a frequency basis. The volume of that is relatively small, and it was never the long-term plan for the fund. The long-term plan was to move to trading. In fact, that's happened slightly later than we anticipated because frequency response prices remained high for an extended period, in part due to the delay in construction and assets coming online. So we enjoyed a particularly good revenue period up until the end of 2022 on the back of frequency response. The anticipated move to trading started to happen at that point. At that point, we were expecting things to work as they were anticipated to, batteries to be utilised, things like that. What we found through 2023 was actually there was a significant underutilisation of batteries in GB, predominantly through the balancing mechanism, which is the control room National Energy System Operator their control room balances the supply and demand through what's known as the balancing mechanism. So in there, batteries were not being utilised. Despite being the most cost-effective solution, they weren't being utilised. There's various reasons behind that, but essentially we came into 2023 on the back of good revenues. Our revenues disappeared overnight, almost. We were being told there isn't a problem in the balancing mechanism, but what we're seeing was our assets were not being used.
Yeah.
So that started in 2023. We've had quite strong dialogue with National Grid, now NESO, and Ofgem and various other sources to first get to the bottom of what was happening, and secondly to push the battery agenda and make sure it's being utilised properly. So batteries weren't being utilised. What was being utilised instead was mostly gas. So we were seeing a lot of curtailment of renewables, turning on gas, using that instead to have some flexibility from gas. The result of that is you lose your renewables, you're paying for thermal, emissions are worse, the cost is more expensive for the end consumer.
Yeah.
So we were pushing to make sure batteries are being utilised. That pressure kind of built up through 2023. Then National Grid ESO, now NESO, announced they were going to roll out OBP, Open Balancing Platform, which is the new control system for operating the network. They were going to roll that out slightly earlier in December and include batteries in that first rollout, which wasn't the original plan. That was targeting using batteries more effectively.
Mm-hmm.
What we actually saw was at the start of 2024, when this was rolled out, the performance for batteries got worse. A few factors in there, but they weren't really being utilised still, even in the new system. We've since then started to understand why. There's various other additional elements that need to be added in before the full value of OBP can be used. What we are seeing though is when it is used, it works effectively. It's effectively an algorithm which picks between the available technologies and picks the most cost effective.
Yeah.
Essentially how you'd imagine the system operates today, but unfortunately it doesn't. But at the same time, they're still running the legacy system. So most of the actions they take is on the old system. We're on the new system. We only get utilised when volume is given to the new system. So that's a challenge that still is ongoing, which is why the revenues haven't picked up quite as much as we were hoping as a result of this launch. That being said, we're starting to see a positive trajectory. The second half of this year has been an improvement over the first half of the year, and we've got various things we've been working on with the portfolio to kind of improve that further as well.
Okay, so other than trying to understand, why batteries weren't being used and advocating for their use and effectively pushing for them to be used for the benefit of the consumer and our renewable targets, what else are you doing in terms of dealing with effectively that backdrop?
Yeah, so there's a few things. So one thing I didn't really touch on was, whilst that's an issue, there was also a few other factors, such as slower recovery in consumer demand on the back of the pricing that the market was seeing not fully going through to consumers yet. We're starting to see a pickup in that demand, so that's happening naturally. Gas prices being low and artificially setting the price at that low point. Reason being is they ignore all of the startup costs and reserving costs for those assets. That doesn't filter into the system price, which then has a knock-on effect. So we're dealing with that as well. On the other point, there's kind of two elements we've done. So we've looked at what's there at the moment and kind of said, what can we control and what can we influence? So on the control side, we've looked internally at our portfolio. So we've looked at the revenue opportunities. Can we achieve revenues through other sources? That's what's led to the recent tolling agreement we announced with Octopus Energy. That came about from a trial we had been running during that time to access the market in a different way. So if our access through the balancing mechanism is effectively barred and blocked, then we need to look at how else we can get to the end consumer. So that's what we did. And that was a trial with a customer to kind of provide the offtake with them. That was the starting point for the tolling arrangement with Octopus Energy. On top of that, we looked at what was happening in the market. So we were seeing, as a result of the revenues falling away in Q1 this year, actually the 2-hour assets we had were more resilient to that drop. The reason being was normally there's 2 cycles in a day. You would charge overnight whilst there's not much power on the system, not much demand on the system, discharge in the morning, discharge again in the afternoon, and then discharge in the evening. So it's what we've referred to as 2 cycles. During that slowdown period of our revenues, what we found was that second part of the day just flattened. So you had 1 cycle overnight and during the day, but you had a much longer shelf on each of those. So each subsequent hour was earning the same as the first hour, which when you're investing, you don't need that, because when you build the first hour, it's a set cost. The second hour is a marginal increase in cost, not
Yeah.
the full amount again.
Yeah.
So normally we'd expect about a 30% increase on the second hour. We're seeing almost 100%. So we noticed our 2 hour assets were doing really well. So we re-looked at the build out of our pipeline. So we had a large pipeline that we're looking to build.
Mm-hmm.
We moved some of that equipment that we were planning on using for those into existing assets to turn them from 1 hour to 2 hours. And we've completed several during the course of this year, roughly about 3 months to complete. So it's significantly quicker than a new build project. So we reacted to that, saw the 2 hour opportunity, moved our investment into that to improve the returns from that standpoint. So it's more resilient on the downside, but also it provides kind of quicker returns for investors too. So that's the things we can control. On top of that, we're also looking at the optimization of the P&L for each asset. So how can we reduce the costs of each asset? So that's all going on in the background. Then on the influence side, that's where we needed to get more involved. So that was stepping up and speaking with now NESO, Ofgem, governments, media, various different sources. And we've been very active in that over the past 2 years. You may have seen some recent articles in kind of headline newspapers recently. It's also got to number 10. They're now talking about what's referred to as a skip rate issue. So the conversation is happening now in the right places. And helpfully, we've got Ed Miliband coming under the new Labour government, who's appointed someone called Chris Stark, who's head of mission control. His whole focus is on, at the moment, how do we decarbonise the energy system by 2030? Previously, we've been looking at longer timeframes than that. So hopefully that support now is coming from the wider sector, politicians as well, and they're pushing to have decarbonisation sooner. The benefit to batteries is the only real flexible technology that can help deliver that by 2030. It's available now, it's cost effective, it can balance the renewable supply that's creating volatility issues. So all of this is happening on the background. The lobbying with, for example, NESO created the OBP launch sooner for batteries. We're now having regular dialogue with NESO. They had an industry-wide conversation just 2 weeks ago where they laid out their plans on how they're going to fix the issues for batteries. They acknowledge the problem now and they're trying to do something about it.
Okay, let me pick it up. So that's definitely something which I want to follow up on, which is, given the current issues, I mean, what kind of time frame do you think NESO is going to take to try and resolve that for you? Yeah,
so they've referred to it as the balancing program.
Mm-hmm.
It's the list of things they're planning on doing over the next 3 years. So it takes us to 2027. There's a few key points for batteries. One of them is reserving. So I talked about gas being reserved at the moment, and that's not cost effective. There was a trial ran in September 2020 where batteries were used for the equivalent reserve. It was just a small selection of assets. Scaled up to today's capacity, that would equate to about 400 plus million saving per annum. So batteries have already demonstrated they can do reserve, they just don't have access today. So reserve is coming. So balancing reserve was launched earlier this year, but to a small degree, only a small number of megawatts. Quick reserve is launching later this year. Quick reserve will be primarily focused at batteries. It's going to be hard for other technologies to fit the criteria for that. But it starts the transition to the new systems from the old systems. So that's one. We can now reserve batteries in advance. And then the second one is, one of the pushbacks we get from the control room is we don't know how long we can use a battery for. There's this arbitrary 30-minute restriction in place at the moment. In the new year, that's going to hopefully fall away by introducing a megawatt hour data point, which is effectively the full capacity of the battery behind just the meter point. So for example, you might have a 50 megawatt, 100 megawatt hour battery. There's a 50 megawatt battery that can run for 2 hours. At the moment, they only see half an hour from that battery. So you've got 4 times that amount is what you can actually deliver, which isn't being utilised. So that's another step. And then finally, overall, is the full transition to the new system. I've said already, they're operating 2 systems today. There's only a small subset of the market that's in the new system, which is demonstrated to be working properly. And then the old system is being run for most of the thermal generation today. So by the end of 2027, all of that will be moved over to the new system. We're pushing for that to be sooner. They've got, in theory, the software and data servers in place now to be able to deliver that, and they can hopefully speed that program up. But the program runs to 2027, which is why, again, on the tolling side, we've kind of linked it to that duration.
Okay, and so that's worth picking up on. So let's get into the Octopus Energy tolling agreement that you've got. How's that going to work? And I think you sort of started. Why do you think it's significant for you?
It's not just significant for us; it's significant for the whole sector.
Mm-hmm.
Batteries have been looked at as a merchant play for quite a while.
Yeah.
It's not seen as quite as similar to renewables, because renewables typically has a long-term PPA contract, so you're off-taking your revenue source is already secured.
Yeah.
With batteries, the investment thesis was around the merchant element. It's the volatility on the supply and demand and creating varied prices. So the significance of this tolling agreement has been that the market now looks at this and says, okay, there's a way in which we can contract our revenues, which can change your investment thesis. You can now look at, for example, leverage financing against that to secure your debt against your income that's already secured, versus a merchant play where you couldn't do that before. But from our perspective, it's significant because we've secured our revenues at a higher level than where the merchant rate was. Yeah. And we've done that for the 2-year period, which we believe is the right length of time to see us through most of that balancing program we just talked about. Yeah. Brings us through that period of more uncertainty over where our revenues will be, and hopefully back into a merchant environment where the merchant rate is much higher. Potentially at that point, we can talk about contracting again, but at higher rates, or enjoying the merchant element that's available to us at that point. But we noticed at the start of this year, struggling revenues, confidence starting to be lost in the sector. We wanted to demonstrate that we can secure out our earnings and demonstrate to you a kind of a reasonable foresight of what's to come. And that's what we've done with this. And hopefully it generates circa 45 million of EBITDA next year without a change in the merchant environment, purely on the combined effect of additional pipeline being added by the end of the year and the tolling agreement. And that's up from circa 20 million annualised from the first half of the year. Okay, so
to provide a little bit of clarity on that, so take either your revenue mix currently or historically. Yeah. How do you see that evolving over the next sort of couple of years based on the actions you've taken right now?
Yeah, so it's helpful to look at the next 2 years because given that's where the contract is set over. So at current merchant levels, we anticipate contracted revenues to make up around 2/3 of our whole revenue stream. Yeah. So it's a significant portion compared to where we've been at previously. Mm-hmm. That allows us to have a lot more confidence on what earnings are going to be during that period and to help with reinstating dividends and things like that. Beyond that, we'd anticipate merchant to improve quite significantly. Yeah. If you look at third-party forecasts, it shows significant growth over the next few years as we return to a normalised market. Yeah. And we have confidence in that because, again, the reserve from storage trial is a good evidence of if batteries are utilised in a fair competitive transaction versus what's already in the system, not only are they cheaper and can offset everything else that's on the system, but we can also demonstrate returns and revenues similar to kind of the average we've been seeing over the past few years at around 120k per megawatt. So that's a significant jump from where we are today. On top of that, we've seen evidence in international markets with similar renewable penetration, what batteries can earn, and that's multiples of where it is in the UK at the moment. So we've got confidence in the merchant element coming back, which is why we've tied half the portfolio for 2 years, return to the merchant environment. Longer term, we'd expect the trading side to be the bulk of our revenue sources.
Okay, so basically there is a signal that the troubles of the last 18 months have been dealt with, and you are anticipating effectively that revenue increase to start coming through, and then that should lead to the better profitability and dividends. So, okay, that's clear. It's a fascinating area.
Yes.
And given how significant it is for policy, where we're meant to be going in terms of energy transition, we have a lot of people who look at this show trying to learn about these sort of different segments. I mean, given your experience in it, where are the good sources to look for more information on battery energy storage and the role it plays within the energy transition theme?
Yeah, so we try to provide as much information as we can in our annual report. Our IM section, for example, goes into quite detailed lengths of what the market's doing, how we're getting involved in that. So definitely advise people to have a look at those sources.
Read the annual report, it's good.
There's also third-party companies such as Modo who are heavily involved in commentating on the space, particularly batteries and what's going on with that space. So again, another helpful source. We're also very happy to chat with anyone who's interested in the sector, and we often have these conversations. It's something we're passionate about, and we want to get that across to investors as well. So any questions, we're also very happy to answer that.
James, thank you so much for coming. It's a fascinating area. I'm really looking forward to seeing how things develop over the coming year. We wish you luck, and hopefully you can come back and update in due course that, you know, all the activity that you've seen, all the actions you've taken, and how that sort of developed for the fund.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. Very nice to be here. Thank you.